The Maglev 5x5 V2 is the result of me just wanting to print another puzzle that was nice enough to enjoy but not too ambitious. Just to have a bit of context in mind, it was printed on my old 3D printer without knowing that I would get a new one, and for those of you who have watched my video on the Bamboo Labs A1 Mini, you know the story. The most obvious and outstanding feature of the Maglev 5x5 V2 is the huge outer layer. It was intentionally designed to be 60mm with a 15mm outer layer, so that the outer layer actually takes up 1/4 of the cube size. Comparing it with the Mini Outsu, which is a proportional 60mm 4x4, you can tell that the outer layers are the same size. Comparing against the Maglev 5x5 V1, the V1 actually is 61mm with a 14mm outer layer and 11mm inners. It was originally meant to have the layer size of the V2, but due to the size of the magnets that I used in this cube to make it Maglev, which are from the RS3 Maglev like ring magnet kits, I had to make the middle layer a little bit bigger. So I settled for a 14:11 ratio instead of 15:10, which is what I have done in the V2. In fact, the stickers themselves came from two different sticker sheets. The inner 9 stickers came from a sticker sheet intended for the Qi Wushuang 5x5, while the outer 16 stickers were an entire sheet of Qi Wuqie 4x4 stickers. So the corners were the same as the corners, then the wings are the same also, but I cut them a little bit shorter to fit the area, and then the centers became the midges. This leaves behind a perimeter of 5x5 stickers, and if I one day decide to redeem the failure that is the Live 453M, those stickers can be used. The Maglev 5x5 V2 actually feels like a huge cube to pick up and turn, which is a weird feeling, considering it's actually smaller than the Gun 562, and yet the Gun 562 doesn't have a huge blocky grip. The Maglev 5x5 V2 is also one of the most beautiful cubes that I've manufactured, not in terms of the actual imperfections. Obviously, there are some pieces that didn't turn out exactly as planned, and the cubes may be slightly bigger than intended, as well as due to differences in how the pieces are put together. Like this is capped and this is 2 halves glued together. Like you can tell that there are some slight differences in size, but with all these imperfections aside, like the overall design of how this cube was planned actually gives this a very unique appearance and overall concept. Externally, it looks like a white cube, but the holes are very dark, and that's because it mainly has black internals. This cube actually gives back a throwback to the era of the illusion cubes or some limited edition cubes. During that time, the injection molding was not as precise, and the stickerless cubes tend to have one side like a little bit higher than the other. To avoid that problem, what some companies did was that they molded the entire internal of the piece as one uniform part, and then they kept it on top. But it also led to some possible creativity, where like you can buy 2 cubes of different colors and swap the caps and produce cubes that looks something like this. In this cube, the black internal actually does give off the impression that the internal is made of some special soft plastic to enhance the turning, but the reality is it's really just 2 colors of PETG. The black and the white in this cube are actually the same material. And to further add to the design of this cube, not every piece is black with a white cap. Instead, every piece that is connected to the hidden internal 3x3 is actually black with a white cap on top of it. Then everything else, which is all the 2nd and 4th layers everywhere, they're just totally white. Another cool thing about the appearance of the cube is that the totally white parts, where it's 2 halves glued together, have the press fit magnet design, whereas the black with white cap parts are actually, the magnets are internal and you can't really see the magnet. So it also does create quite a cool look, where like it feels like there's nothing here, but it does attract something here, and you can say the same on the middle. Finally, the edges are also designed in an arc-shaped manner, just like the Gun 562. The actual mechanism of the puzzle is nothing too remarkable. Most of the features are recycled from the V1, and in fact, one of the unique features of the V1 have been removed. So similar to the V1, the V2 is actually a 2-shell puzzle, consisting of a fully functional internal 3x3, followed by an outer shell, which is the 5x5. However, the V2 makes this way more obvious, where the entire internal 3x3 is pretty much black, and everything else from the outer 5x5 shell is white. So this really shows off the demarcation between the actual internal 3x3 and the outer 5x5 pieces. And unlike the Gun 562 and similar to the V1, the internal 3x3 is built with a stalkless center design. This is actually a design typical of modern 3x3s, where the center stalk is actually flipped backwards to be inside the center piece, as opposed to having an external stalk. And the middle layer here can be designed a bit thinner, to be as thin as a screw, while the outer pieces themselves can be designed a bit bigger. Both the V1 and the V2 also feature corner-to-core magnets, but the V1 actually lacks torpedoes, so the corners actually can get pulled into the core as the cube is partially assembled, and they only stay in place once you fully assemble the cube. Whereas in the V2, the edges in fact do have torpedoes, and resulting in an internal 3x3 where the internal shell pieces can neither be pushed in or pulled out. The Maglev 5x5 V1 has a feature which I refer to as a phantom spring. You can check that out in the cube's own video. This is where I took advantage of the fact that Maglev does not consist of a continuous cylinder like a spring does, and that the space located between the two ring magnets is practically empty. What sounded like a creative idea on paper actually resulted in some restrictions in practice. The idea technically could still work if a conical style magnet is used for the Valkyrie's cone, but a phantom version where the middle space is empty, but you got a small one on top and a bigger one below. So the smaller one can still fit into the top column, while the bigger one can just be glued to the bottom, which is what I did in the V1. Since it's bigger, it's more powerful, so there's more strength. But with the V1, I was limited by the fact that I only have RS3 magnets, which causes the repulsion to be too weak, because I spaced them a bit too far apart. Like the centerpiece itself was unable to lift very high because I totally used up the space in between the two magnets, and this cube actually has very limited elasticity and not much corner cutting. Its auto alignment is still really cool though. The V2 actually peeled back on the phantom spring feature, where I just used smaller magnets. This one came from the MGC Maglev like square 1 conversion kit, which are smaller than the RS3 Maglev like ring magnets. And then I designed the center column to be fatter, so that it's more or less big enough to include the space for the two magnets. This in turn makes it such that there's nothing in between the screws, and it allows the cube to have sufficient room to stretch vertically. The Maglev 5x5 V2 also features something which I call the high anchor. You can watch this. I made a quick mention of this in my Speedcube features tier list video, and this is where, in addition to the standard double anchor that most cubes have, there's another anchor that is placed much nearer to the head of the corner piece rather than near the roots. The feature first appeared in the Moyi Aoshi V1, but later it also showed up a lot in like the Yixing Little Magic series, as well as the MGC 4x4. However, many of the later cubes down the line actually eliminated presence of the anchor on the corner, but if you look at the surrounding pieces, you can still see it in the cut line. So you can see the edge actually has a small step here. Here's the same feature on the MGC 4x4. I'm not too sure how much difference this makes to the stability, but printing from an Ender 2 Pro, which is the printer used to print the majority of this puzzle, the design definitely increases the percentage of flat faces, because now instead of having to have a slope here, all the remaining pieces here actually have a flat face. It became much easier to take a file and just stick it against the flat faces and send away the 3D print's imperfections, such as blobs and stringing. However, my Ender 2 Pro just broke down like when this puzzle was about 80% done, which resulted in me finally upgrading to a newer printer, and it pretty much printed the remainder of the edges. So here's actually, I have one edge here that's printed by my Bamboo Labs A1 Mini and one edge that's printed by my Ender 2 Pro, and there's quite a significant difference in the quality. The Maglev 5x5 V2 actually features a zigzag anti-stick design, but it didn't turn out very well in the Ender 2 Pro printed pieces, but on the Bamboo Labs printed pieces, you can actually see the zigzag line. The actual performance of the Maglev 5x5 V2 is among the best of my 3D printed puzzles. It's still not quite at the level of a mass-produced puzzle, but it's definitely good by 3D print standards, or more particularly FDM printed standards. The turning is comparable to the PETG 3x3 from my PLA versus PETG video, as well as my 3x3x4. But it's slightly worse in a proportionate sense. That is like, since it's understandable that a 5x5 is a bigger cube with more pieces, so it definitely does feel heavier and less stable than these two, simply just from having more pieces. It's like, it feels proportionate in the sense, right? Like comparing just a normal 5x5 to a normal 3x3, for example, and it doesn't feel like disproportionately more like unstable or catchy than those cubes. Yes, it does have a little bit more catching than a 3x3, but that's pretty much expected going from a smaller cube to a bigger cube. However, comparing against the V1, I actually still think the V1 performs a little better than the V2. So the V1 actually lacks some flexibility due to how the mechanism is designed, but that also caused the cube to be significantly more stable. Like the V2 feels like a worse version of how I would describe the Shadow V3 and the Spark V2, where there's actually a lot of tech thrown in to increase the stability, but the cube itself is unstable and you can actually like flex it first and then it rebounds back. It's not in the category of the Outshi and Outfu where the cube just doesn't flex in the first place, and it's possibly due to the V2 not having an elasticity limiter in its design at all. So here's a design comparing it to a modern 3x3, the V5 and a normal 5x5 to show you what I mean. Not having an elasticity limiter might actually cause this cube to perpetually feel like a loosely tensioned cube. Another reason why the V1 is possibly better is because it represents a different 3D print technology, one with much higher dimensional accuracy, but is way more expensive. So how the V1 was built was that I sent my parts 3D printing service, which is Sculptio, and I paid them to print all the parts, which totaled to 99 parts for a 5x5 and a price tag somewhere between 2/3 or 4/5 of my entire Ender 2 Pro itself. And the parts, while still having a sandy feel, have a much higher consistency and print quality than the V2, which was 80% printed on my outdated FDM printer and 20% by a newer printer, making it far grindier and catchier than what it is compared to the V1. So the V1 is pretty much an accumulation of everything I've learned with SLS printing, and it's pretty much my ultimate puzzle to max out the SLS tech. The Maglev 5x5 V2 being FDM still doesn't match with the V1, but it actually beats all my other SLS puzzles, although not that many, considering one of them is actually a failed product that exploded, and the other one, the very first puzzle that I printed, and it's really pretty unstable because I also didn't know that much about tolerances back then. So overall, the Maglev 5x5 V2 does earn its share of cool points, mostly from how it looks, with that massively huge outer layer, the Illusion style caps, and the Gun 562 arc edges. The rest of its features are actually more or less recycled from the V1. And while I don't think this should be the universal look accepted by all 5x5s, it's a unique concept and also a unique solving experience.